Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Suzanne. We really appreciate your participation and all the remarks. To remind everybody that these sessions are being recorded. If you or anybody else is interested to get copies of the sessions or the entire copy, please let us know. We'll be happy to share it with you, and it will be also on the Georgia Tech Cyber's website. With this, I would like to welcome speakers and moderator of session 2, Mr. Brian Dunn, Ms. Christine Cadigan, and Mr. Ken Stewart. Their bios are in the book, program book, and I would request moderator, Mr. Ken Stewart, to please start the session.
Thank you, Ani, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, and welcome to session 2, Sustainability and Net Zero Carbon Emissions, Goals, Practices, and Solutions. And I see that one of our speakers is not quite with us yet, so I think that she will go second, Brian, and that way we can make sure that we got the timing right. My name is Ken Stewart, and I've been involved in carbon sequestration in one way or one form or another for a little more than 15 years, I'd say. The thing that always kind of comes to mind to me as I think about our subject today is that carbon sequestration and the carbon markets and credits and buying and selling, quite frankly, are still a little bit of the Wild West out there. And so we're an interesting, exciting, developing marketplace and technology, as we've heard earlier as well. We have 2 really wonderful panelists with us today. They're going to give us what I think is a sane, a programmatic and a solution-based perspective on carbon neutrality and carbon markets. Brian Dunn, who's you can see is with us now, is the Global Vice President of Americold, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Also trying to join us, I'm sure, is Christine Cadigan, who is the president of the Family Forest Impact Foundation. And there, as Ani mentioned, their materials, biomaterials are in the program materials. So I welcome you to look at that. Also, we'll take, certainly add questions in the chat. We'll deal with those as we have time in the program. But I'm going to do a quick introduction just of both of Brian and Christine so that we can flow from one to the other. Brian is the Global Vice President of Maintenance and Engineer, or Energy at Americold. Quite a big job. This is one of those kind of companies that many of you may not have even heard of, but they're in 14 countries, and I'm told that maybe as much as 50% of the perishables that go across our table have also been handled by Americold facilities in one way or the other. Brian has a large responsibility with the company overseeing sustainable initiatives, energy efficiency, usage, power generation, environmental and sensitive maintenance activities. He has been in a number of, with a number of companies, Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, also the University of Tennessee. He's certified in more engineering fields than I even knew existed. He's got an MBA from Colorado State and a bachelor's from Middle Tennessee State. So Brian, welcome. He's going to talk about an overarching framework for sustainability for U.S. corporations, including Americold, and also about the role and impact of the SEC in that regard. So I think what I'm going to do, Brian, is wait to introduce Christine when she shows up. So I'll turn the program over to you, Brian. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ken. I'll go ahead and share my screen now. So give me just a second here. All right. Well, I'm not sure what's going on. It's not allowing me to share the screen.
Brian, we are seeing your screen.
It's good.
Brian, you're on mute mode.
Hey, Brian, you're muted.
I'm not sure what happened, but when I try to share the screen, it mutes me automatically.
I'll share your presentation.
Sorry.
No problem.
Well, while you're pulling the screen, I've got about 12 minutes, so I want to make the best of that time while Ani's pulling up the screen. What I wanted to talk about today, I think, flows really well into what Novellus was talking about. Ani, thank you. So Novellus, not all companies are going to be as transparent and as great as stewards of the environment and the resources that they have. As Novellus showed, there's a lot of what we call greenwashing out there. And the greenwashing is a way that, companies can compile their data, tell their story in a way that is most compelling to them and to kind of influence investors in a way that may not be as transparent as we would hope to have. And so there are multiple frameworks that different investors use that ask us to report out our ESGs, our environmental, social, and governance materials and data. But each of those are slightly different. Many of you've probably seen many of them. There's tons of different acronyms for them. There's tons of different ones. And then there's different supply chains as companies begin to get greener and want to really embrace how they impact the climate change. They have initiatives to have 100% sustainability reporting within their supply chain. And so there's multiple different companies that have popped up because of that we use for reporting out stuff like, hey, what's our kilowatt hour usage? What's our metric ton CO2e and how much water we're using? And then within there, some of those frameworks, they want us to talk about, they want public companies and your investors want to know, well, what are some of the risks from climate change to your business? Well, because I can tell the story and other companies can tell the story in a way that they want to share it, and if I keep it out of my SEC filings, there's not a lot of accountability around that. So you can see how it makes it very difficult for an investor to really look at your company and look at what you're doing and gain understanding of, are you really moving the needle on climate change? Do you really understand the risk to your business, or are you just doing what's called greenwashing like I shared? So in March of this year, the SEC, they made a proposal to standardize the reporting. And that's what I want to share with you guys today. That's what I want to share with this team. And so what it really does is it says that there's really 6 key things that would happen in this. You have to gain, they want to make a standardized SEC to where, what is your governance of your climate related risk and your management practices? I think that's important, right? And then what climate related risk have you identified? If I'm a public company and I've identified a risk and I don't want to share it with you right now, I could potentially not share that climate related risk. So think about that in the fact of let's say someone that's maybe like a big beef producer. If they've identified that the bulk of their corn that they get to feed their livestock, if they've identified that the cost of that's going to go up because the supplies are going to go down in the US due to heat waves and they're going to have to bring in feed from somewhere else, they already know that. They may have already did a climate scenario analysis and seen that. But currently they may not have to share that out, right? They could share it out, but they may not share it out. With the SEC changes, you would be required to do that. And not only that, you would be required to share what these climate related risks that you've already have, how they've affected you and what they might affect you. And then you've got to understand certain events. Like I think about, some of the ice storms that happened in Texas last year and the year before. If you understand what those severe weather events are and what the impact of those could be on your business going forward, currently, you don't really have any kind of responsibility to go out and share that out. Whereas with this new proposals that the SEC is putting out, public companies would be required to do that. And wouldn't that be of interest to an investor if you're really looking at it? And then the other thing that's there is greenhouse gas emissions. So a lot of companies report out on their greenhouse gas emissions. They'll report out on their scope ones, which are your direct greenhouse gas emissions, meaning that what you do, the product that you produce during the production of it, what greenhouse gases do you produce in doing so? And then you have what's called scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions, which are your indirect emissions. So your company is purchasing power from the utilities companies to make your product. And so you don't directly create the power, but the power that's being created for you does have a metric ton CO2 impact, right? There is some there. It's scope 2 emissions. So right now, there's nothing that requires you to report out on that, not accurately. And so you could do something like I just recently saw in one of the big franchises that fast food franchises in America, where they come out with a report recently showing their greenhouse gas emissions towards same stores. So during COVID, they had expanded multiple sites. They had many different sites that had grown, that many franchises added. But when you go back and look at their sustainability report, what you see is they see that they're not reporting on the new metric ton CO2e that they're putting out there for greenhouse gas emissions. They're only putting out there same store. And that's a form of greenwashing, because they can show that if you just look at the same store, they may have not done much in moving the needle on really focusing on climate related issues. But at the same source sites, because they become a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective, their kilowatt hours went down. So their metric ton CO2e went down, and they can show that. So it makes it look like to investors and others that they really worked hard this past year and made an impact. Well, with the new rules that the SEC came out with, in following years, they would not be able to do that. They would have to report it out in a standardized mode. So it would make it even for all investors to look at and say, do I want to buy stock shares in this company or shares in this company? And they would be able to understand it better. Then the last thing is that an attestation report. And what that really is saying that right now, you may or may not have someone come in and do an audit of your environmental reporting that you're putting out. So a lot of companies do. A lot of companies use folks like Ernst & Young's, just like a financial. They maybe use SASB. They may use different entities to come in because they want to make sure that what they're sharing out is accurate. But not all companies do that. Most, in fact, don't. What the SEC wants to do is the SEC wants to make sure that if you're going to report this out, and we're going to have a standardized process, we want to make sure that it's audited, that it's correct, that our investors can look at it. They're going to make material decisions based off of it. So when I think of that overview that I just gave, I start thinking about, well, how does that impact you? How does that impact the person out there that's got a 401k and they want to go buy some shares? And how does that affect you just in your day-to-day life? Well, I heard some of the other folks earlier, and they were talking about, what they do at Novellus and their teams. So I joined Americold in 2018. And at that time, there wasn't anybody working in sustainability. We didn't call it sustainability, and there was no one hired for that. Now we have 3 people that pretty much work full-time doing sustainability and energy. We have a ESG committee that's comprised of our C-suite. So it takes teams from there. And then we also report out into the board. So why would that be important? Well, you got to think about that. That's costs now that have to be pushed back into the consumer. And as we move on this SEC rulings, if we were to start doing climate related scenario analysis, right? And I've got to start looking at products, and I start thinking about a product and I say, well, I'm going to have to gain understanding of crops out in the field because I have a lot of beef that I store and poultry that I store in cold storage. And even though I don't personally feed the animal, I don't slaughter the animal, I don't butcher the animal, I only hold it in my cold stores, which for you would be like a freezer, but we have massive freezers. I still need to understand what will the climate risk do to that business that gives me business. It's part of my supply chain. Because if I don't understand that in the way that they were looking at when they talk about some of the climate related risk, well, that would mean that under the new SEC rules, I would not be following those policies. So I'd have to go out and do climate related scenario analysis on what the impacts could be to crops in, say, the Midwest. Now, if I've got to do that, you think about, I'm going to have to add on some folks, some research analysts to come in. They're going to be doing that. They're going to spend time doing that. And that's just for one thing, right? That's not for bunches. That's for one thing. So it's going to add in a lot of new jobs into companies, corporate companies like ours, public companies. But it's also going to add a tremendous amount more cost into the business. And I see it being a little bit of a disruptor, especially to smaller public companies or registered investment advisors, things like that. We're going to see a big impact. But you've also got a lot of companies that have came out and they have these goals. You'll see them all the time. We have ESG objectives and goals, and we'll share out like we want to get to net zero by 2050. And I think that's where like Christine Cadigan's group, the Family Forest Foundation, really come in hand, because a group like mine, I'm going to put in solar biodigesters. I'm going to tap into wind energy. I'm going to become more, technology is going to make the equipment that we use more efficient, so I use less energy. But for me to get to net zero, it's going to take folks like Christine and the Family Forest Foundation that can go out there and have those carbon credits that we can go out and purchase to help get us down, at the same time make an impact to the rural families that own these forests out there. So I think with that, it's a good segue, Ken, to go to Christine, and I'm open to any questions that anyone has at the end of it.
Thank you, Brian. What a great perspective you've given to what's important to corporations as they look at the exposure, risk, and opportunities associated with what the SEC is doing, for instance, and what the public is expecting, as another level to it as well, and the markets. Christine, welcome. Appreciate you coming today. I want to do a quick introduction of Christine, and then at the end, we'll go to questions. Christine's the president of the Family Forest Carbon Program, which is a joint venture between the American Forest Foundation and the Nature Conservancy. She joined the American Forest Foundation in 2011 and has been leading the Family Forest Carbon Program since 2019. And this is a startup, so it's a different kind of business that's going in this exciting market. They, of course, are suppliers of verified carbon units, principally sourced from family forest landowners across the United States. She has a master's in environmental management, master's in forestry, both from Duke. Christine, I'll turn it over to you. And Brian, thanks for the good segue into this. Welcome, Christine.
Good morning. Thank you. Let me just pull up my slides here. Are you all seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Family Forest Carbon Program. I'm delighted to follow up right behind you, Brian. Thanks for that very interesting conversation. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the Family Forest Carbon Program. And this really is, as Brian teased, this really is a solution for many of the companies that have these net zero or sustainability goals and are seeking to offset their residual emissions. So programs like ours provide these companies or these interested parties with opportunities to purchase verified credit units. As Ken mentioned, the Family Forest Carbon Program is a partnership between the Nature Conservancy and the American Forest Foundation. And I work for and represent the American Forest Foundation. And the two entities came together with the realization that if we really want to leverage one of the US's primary natural climate solutions, nature-based climate solutions, then we had to figure out how to make these programs, these forest carbon programs, work for small and individual family landowners. We have assembled quite the team to work on this. Global experts on voluntary carbon markets, on forest carbon, on reaching and engaging landowners, both from the American Forest Foundation as well as from our partner, the Nature Conservancy. But I think it's helpful just to take a step back and think about why forests in the first place. What really is the potential, particularly domestically? And our partner, the Nature Conservancy, has done some research actually quantifying the potential for forests to provide a globally significant climate mitigation solution. And what you see from this graph actually is that forests provide one of the largest land-based solutions. And it's in particular reforestation and natural forest management, or often termed improved forest management, provide the greatest benefit in terms of volume and sort of quantity of impact, but also cost-effective impact. So the dark green to light green bars represent the opportunity to provide cost-effective solutions, particularly in a decade, in this urgent decade where we want to achieve our climate goals as quickly and as affordably as possible. But why am I talking about family forests? What many of you may not necessarily realize is that over a third of America's forests are owned by these small individual family forest owners. That's represents 11 million ownerships. So these are individual people which in aggregate can have a tremendous impact. The challenge is actually motivating, reaching, and empowering these folks to actually be a part of the solution. Unfortunately, when you think about or when you look at the existing forest carbon projects, very few, actually less than 1% of those forest projects represent this land ownership constituency. So they're sidelined. They represent a tremendous potential opportunity, but can't currently be a part of the solution. And so that's where the Nature Conservancy and the American Forest Foundation came together to innovate a program that, again, reduced barriers to entry for these small family forest owners and enable them to join the forest carbon project solution. Our goal is to reach 20% of these family-owned forest acres by the end of the decade and sequester globally meaningful carbon and be a solution for many of these companies seeking net zero or other sustainability goals. Our program incorporates innovations, a number of different innovations that, like I said before, reduces barriers to entry so that these landowners can actually be a part of the solution, but it also advances forest carbon accounting through our new methodology, which is getting verified by Verra's Verified Carbon Standard. So there are a number of innovations in that methodology that we feel really raises the bar and pushes the credibility and integrity of the carbon claims that we're making as a program. And interestingly, we have a very innovative financing structure as well. So as is probably quite intuitive, it takes a while for forest carbon to actually generate a carbon benefit that can be monetized on the voluntary carbon market and receive sufficient revenue to actually overcome program administration and implementation costs. So our program, in order to finance our program, we require low-cost capital at the outset. And that we've identified that the best way to do that is either through a loan or a bond. And then we use that capital to pay landowners incentive payments to implement specific forest management practices on their property. So we use that cash again to pay landowners those incentive payments, and in return, landowners sign contracts with our program that gives the program the rights to the carbon that's produced on that property. The program assumes the responsibility for monitoring, reporting, and verifying that carbon claim. We then monetize that claim, that verified credit unit, again, verified by Verra's Verified Carbon Standard, on the voluntary carbon market. And these are where interested companies can buy these verified credit units. And then we use the revenue from those sales to pay back principal and interest on the capital that we've acquired. And we actually just issued our first green bond two weeks ago. We're very excited. We just issued our first $10 million green bond, and it was verified by Kestrel verifiers as a green bond and meeting these sustainable development goals. So SDGs 9, 12, 13, 15, and 17. And as others may have mentioned, there isn't really a consistent or recognized reporting structure for how individual projects or companies report on these SDGs. So we are, we'll be reporting on these based on the recommendations that was provided to us by Kestrel. and working with the community to further develop how we report on and represent these SDGs. Our program we piloted the program in the Central Appalachian. This is this dark green circle here. But like I said before, we have plans to engage and enroll 20% of family forest owners across the US. So we're looking to expand the program currently in the Northeast, in the Midwest, in the Southeast, and certainly out West. So these are our upcoming program expansions and where we will soon have VCUs available for sale on the voluntary carbon market. And with that, this is my last slide, Ken, but I just wanted to share a little bit about some of the partners and corporate credit buyers that have engaged in this program. Some of these represent philanthropic investment. Others represent folks who actually purchased our credits, and specifically Amazon, Disney, REI. Those all represent folks who have signed long-term forward offtake agreements for our particular credits. So with that, Ken, I will yield the floor back to you.
Thank you, Christine. Appreciate your presentation. We have about a little more than 10 minutes left. We have two ways of getting questions to our speakers. One is through the Q&A tool, and the other one is through chat. And I see some have come in through the Q&A tool. And to give you a chance to write your questions down, I'll just start with a question to Brian. You know, it was really interesting what you're talking, as you describe what the SEC is doing. I'm being a corporate, graduate myself. I'm always worried about regulations, and in this particular emerging field, as you mentioned, is there any concern or risk about emerging regulations or a further development of regulations relative to sustainability that could present a risk? I know you're reporting to the board on this, so obviously it's a high-profile responsibility.
Yes. So the SEC was opened up for response, but then the SEC actually proposed new rules changes for how responses could come back in. My thoughts is that there are going to be tremendous legal battles over these regulations. I don't think most companies are opposed to the actual regulations themselves. They're more opposed to the timing of them, because a lot of companies are going to have to invest tremendous amounts of dollars and time into getting up to speed on some of these. If you were already doing the climate development program, if you were already in that kind of scenario, or the task force on climate financials, if you're on that piece, if you're already doing that, that's kind of what the SEC adopted. But I do expect legal challenges everywhere that I go, that we hear about it, that we're seeing. No one really expects that this proposal is going to move forward very quickly. It's going to be tied up in court for a long time.
Well, it's unfortunately that's how a lot of things develop. Is in that arena. Christine, I want to pass a question to you as well. And just as this is developing with the SEC and regulations that corporations are dealing with, it's going to drive their behavior. And one of the things that we're counting on within the Family Forest Impact Foundation is that there is a market for these verified carbon credits, and the financing, the development of the credits, the sales of the credits are a lot more complex, I think, than most people think. And many have tried it, to develop these products and put them into the marketplace, and they haven't all worked. What makes the Family Forest Impact Foundation different? Why are your credits going to be successful?
Yeah, I think it's helpful to just first kind of ground and contextualize the voluntary carbon market as it is today. So without any substantial government intervention, we have seen massive growth in the voluntary carbon market in particular over the last couple of years. Prices have increased exponentially, and we're starting to see that buyers and greater, or corporate entities in greater and greater numbers are actually setting these net zero goals and looking for a source to offset their residual emissions. So they've done all they can within their existing operations and are now looking to address those scope 2 or 3 emissions that they couldn't otherwise take care of given current technology or business operation improvements. And what we're starting to see those companies really focus in on is the quality of the credits that are offered on the marketplace. So that's how we've designed our program, is to specifically fill that niche. We want to ensure, or we want companies who are buying our credits to feel really confident that they're getting a very credible, certainly additional carbon claim that they can use confidently to incorporate into their net zero goals. And our carbon accounting methodology, which I touched on really briefly, but includes a couple of key innovations, which we really feel like advances the forest carbon accounting science and ensures that the claims we're making are highly credible.
Good. Brian, I see you went off mute.
Yeah, there was something I wanted to add to that. And this is really for all those out there. I think what Christine's talking to, for those that can be the early adopters and sign up and begin partnering with folks like Christine on being able to purchase these carbon credits, you're going to be ahead of the game for most people, because the SEC rules will take place. It may take place 3, 4, 5 years down the road, but all major companies have made goals and objectives to get to net zero or to get there by a certain date. And like Christine said, you're not going, a lot of them, the technology is just not out there. You can only go so far. And if you wait until we get through all the legal challenges and you are required to do it by then, well, the cost of those carbon credits are going to go up, because there's going to be a limit. The market's going to be shrinking because people are already going to be gobbling up. Companies like Christine, they're going to be working with that foundation, and there won't be a lot left. So what is left will be very, very, very high. If you want to get a model for it, look at what goes on in Europe right now with having to buy carbon credits over there. You can see folks that were early on into it. The price for them when they bought carbon futures is a lot different than folks that are buying carbon futures today. It's night and day difference. So I really enjoyed listening to Christine today. I really enjoyed what you're doing there. And I'd love to have some conversations offline to see how we can get partnered up with you as well.
Well, I suspect there's contact information for both of our speakers there for those of you in the seminar that are interested in learning some more. To your point, though, Brian, and this is to you, Christine, the demand and supply balance is awfully important. What are you seeing right now for verified carbon credit demand versus supply in the United States? Is all we can talk to here, I think.
Yeah, great question. I think right now the appetite for high quality nature-based solutions for claims using or nature-based solution claims that represent high quality claims, there's more demand than there is supply, actually. And that's a result of a couple of different things, of folks being able to initiate projects like the one that I just spoke to, right? There are certainly other examples. And as Brian alluded to, the cost of doing business, even for project developers, is it's significant, right? And to actually deliver a very credible claim costs a certain amount of money, and not all companies are in a position to actually pay for those at this point in time.
Well, a question just popped up in the chat, or rather a comment, that Denmark had recently announced a carbon tax of about $154 per ton. That's, of course, been here in the United States, bannered around a bit as well. How does that change your behavior at Americold, Brian, if it was to occur here?
Well, it's changed it very significantly. I mean, we already do business in Europe, and there's already carbon taxes like that in there. You have a threshold you can get to, and if you go above that, you have to pay it off. So we hedge on buying carbon futures now so that I can use those later when I need them. So yeah, it's very impactful. It becomes very costly to corporations. And that's why I do believe that work like Christine's doing and others like that it's so necessary and needed. Right now, you could go put solar on and you can get some solar renewable energy credits and things like that. But in the past, that's how you made these projects, to what Christine alluded to, becomes very costly. That's how you made those projects profitable and sold them. You said, hey, there's these tax credits that we can get, and we can use those to offset the cost. And that helps our payback go from like maybe like to 8 years or 6 years for these $1 million, $2 million solar projects. Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore, because a lot of folks are now keeping those solar renewable energy credits that have a ton of value to them that you would sell on the open market. They find that they're more valuable to keep them for themselves. And and companies are seeing that. So they themselves are recognizing where they used to use it as a monetary stream. Now they're using it saying, we need to keep this because it helps us look year over year that we're being able to show that we're reducing our metric ton CO2e.
I'm curious, and this question really is to either or both of you. So these credits that are being, demanded and generated for verified carbon, do they is there reciprocity where they are recognized in Europe even though they're generated in the United States, or vice versa? Are these international in nature? And what does the future of that market really look like in that regard? And who's responsible for that? So this is either one of you.
Yeah, so I think the short answer is that those rules are currently being written in many countries, right? So countries will have these nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, and they're still kind of figuring out. Those are the conversations that have been happening last year at COP26, and again coming up this year when they're talking about the Article 6 negotiations. It's all about how those rules are going to play out. And within the U.S. context, right, we still actually have to figure out how we want to account for our NDCs, and whether or not or what the U.S. wants to do in allowing project developers to seek correspondence to sell their credits on an international marketplace, right? If the U.S. adjusts their NDCs to subtract whatever a particular entity is selling internationally for other companies to incorporate in, or other countries to incorporate in their own NDCs. So that's that playbook is still being written, is the short answer, Ken. And there's a lot of conversation going on about how that's actually going to come to pass.
I suspect that would change the sort of the market dynamic for the credits, and probably even the pricing dynamic. So Brian, would that be beneficial for your company to be able to create, to buy credit anywhere, to be used anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what's happening now. When I shared before about, and you said it's kind of this wild, wild west, but when I shared before the idea that you could present the data in any way that you wanted to, that could tell the story for your company, you could do that right now. So if you're a company in the US, and you have some entities here and you have a lot of entities overseas, or a lot of companies, a lot of sites overseas, and you're putting solar here and you're getting those credits for that, you're not normally separating out and saying, hey, in Europe, by the way, this is how much metric tons we're putting over there. No, you combine them together, and you're able to take what you've done here in the US, the carbon credits you've generated here, and you kind of combine them with your whole organization, and you tell the story in the way you want to. I think with the rules that the SEC would be putting in place, and back to what Christine's saying, as the rules are getting written overseas as well, that would go away. And I think it would be very clear on what you could and could not do. But to ultimately answer your question, I would like to see it where you could go globally, and maybe even have where there's a weighting to it, so that things that you're doing in like India, China, places like that, that there might be a greater some sort of a weight or multiple for the renewables that you're putting there, as opposed to in the US, because India, China, those are some areas that really need this kind of infrastructure and investment put in. If there was a payback on the carbon credit side of it, that could be a multiple. It might make it worth time. Good.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Christine. You've been wonderful speakers. You've created a lot for us to think about, and in this market, very interesting market. And so I appreciate your time today. So I'm going to pass it back now to Ani for the next segment.